Who are my favourite classical composers? This is just kind of something a bit different. I'm going to do a video. It's a response to a response I got from a post that I put up the other day about classical music. My wife asked me what my favourite classical composer was, and I couldn't answer it because how do you answer something like that? And I put a message up on Facebook, which got a bit unusual. It took me out of sort of caught me out of the blue. It's a very negative, suspicious. I don't know what the word is, but this person seemed to think that I made up this event. That my wife never asked me this question, which is, that's strange because she's always around classical music because I'm always playing classical music. We have that type of relationship where if classical music is playing, she'll ask me, what's this? And I'll go, oh, that's Beethoven's 8th piano sonata or whatever. So for her to ask me a question like that when hasn't been exposed to that much classical music isn't really that surprising. And it's kind of weird that anyone would think that was fabricated. And also he did say that I Googled a bunch of classical composers to make myself look intellectual. So yeah, I'm a petty person, so if I'm not saying that it makes you smart or anything to listen to classical or know classical composers. It's no different to any other style of music. I could list metal and rock, like Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath, Deep Purple, Yngwie Malmsteen, Dream Theater. I could go on forever with rock and classical, and is that considered intellectual? Does that make me an intellectual? Probably not, definitely not. No, I would say definitely not. It just means that I like music, doesn't it? I'm not really a music historian, although I do love history. One of my other loves, more than music, is history. I've always loved history since I was a kid. The history of England and Europe, and the history of warfare, the history of music a little bit. I've delved into a little bit of the history of music. History of language, English language. I really love history. If there was anything that I could have studied at university, it probably would have been history. So I'm going to go through the list. I didn't delete the comment, the post that I made. I just put it on off public. So I've written down the list of these composers that I allegedly Googled. They're all off the cuff. They're all I work long hours. I work 12-hour days, and this is the first day I've had off since posting that. So I don't have time to go Googling different composers and whatever. So these are all just off the top of my head. And what I thought I'd do is I'd actually, being petty, I'm going to double down and I'm going to go through all the composers that I wrote down and go into boring detail about why they're important to me and why I like them. And who knows, I might even lose a few friends over this. So if you don't like classical music, I don't know why you're still watching. But anyway, so the first one, so I'll go through the list. So I wrote down Wagner, so obviously Richard Wagner, Handel, J.S. Bach, Debussy, Claude Debussy, Eric Satie, Maurice Ravel, Beethoven, Rachmaninoff, Tchaikovsky, Stravinsky, Grieg, Gregorio Allegri, Periton, Monteverdi, Mozart, Vivaldi, Paganini, and King Henry VIII. That's not a joke, that's a serious entry there from one of England's kings, who one of his skills he had to have was being able to compose, and he did compose. He's credited for composing several pieces of music, one of which is one of my favourite pieces of music. So I'll go into that after. So this is not going to be edited either, so just bear with me. So let's start with Wagner. Okay, oh my God, where do I even begin with Wagner? So Wagner I discovered maybe less than 10 years ago. Also, the thing about Wagner is, the personal connection I've got with Wagner is, I actually wanted to name my son Wagner after Richard Wagner. And my son's mother, she kind of did entertain the idea for a little while, but she didn't like how it was spelled with a W, but then there's a German pronunciation, so it's spelled with a W, but it's pronounced Wagner. She said, what about if we call him Wagner? And I said, no, I want to keep with the traditional German, spell it W and pronounce it Wagner. And then she said, what about pronounce it with a V, like write it with a V? And I didn't want to do that. So we put that on the maybe pile. And she came up with the name Finley, which is a very Celtic sounding name. I love the name Finley. And I already named our daughter Ruby, so I thought, okay, yeah, that's definitely a compromise I can make. And in hindsight, I think I like the name Finley. I don't know now whether or not he would have suited Wagner. He's definitely a Finley. So that's one affiliation I sort of have with Wagner, that I love Wagner's music so much that I wanted to name my son Wagner after Richard Wagner. Now, I'm not very good with German pronunciations and the names of he's got a lot of operas. Richard Wagner wrote a lot of operas. He's a more modern, I don't know if you want to say modern, but he's towards the end of the classical period. And he's got a lot of operas, and I can't remember the name. It starts with L. I can't even think of the name. I'm not going to even try and pronounce it. That's one of the first operas I heard that really pulled me in. There's so much emotion in his music. Everyone knows the ring cycle, that so that's like the ring cycle. The ring cycle also has another piece of music called Siegfried's Funeral. That's also one of my favorite pieces of music. But I think the thing that really pulled me in with Richard Wagner was Tristan. Tristan has this whole section at the beginning where it starts out with like two notes and then a chord, so it goes da, da, ja, and goes into this really dissonant, unsatisfying chord that's not resolved. It's the thing about Western music is it's resolved. That's why we like to listen to it. That's why it's comfortable for our ears, because it resolves. It's got resolution. It resolves itself. Where this piece of music wouldn't resolve. It's quite long, and it's just full of fairly slow music with different paces. It has different sort of pacing to it, but it doesn't resolve. And it's based on the opera itself. There's a piece in the opera about two illicit lovers, like two people having an affair and having a sexual encounter, but they get sort of, someone interrupts and comes in and sort of catches them, and the music's trying to capture the experience of two really passionate lovers that are just about to engage in sex, or engaging in sex, but they don't get to satisfy what they started. And the music's trying to capture that. And it does capture that. It's really, really, it keeps me, you have to be listening to it. It's not the type of music you can just put on in the background, but it keeps you on the edge of your seat. And it's also got this other section where it's got these cascading violins, the string section. Very slowly goes up and down, and it always reminds me of waves lapping up onto the ocean. It's got the same feel, and every time I hear that, I just imagine, I can't not get the image of waves coming up onto the sand and then drifting back again. Wagner is music that Richard Wagner's music's always taken me on a journey when I listen to it. It would be my favorite. I could have easily said Richard Wagner with one exception. So he writes operas. When early opera came in, the music was quite pure. The melody was quite pure, and the singing was quite pure. From what I hear, I'm not an expert, but that's what my ears hear. Which is kind of like more similar to modern sort of music. It's very easy to listen to, but as opera progressed, and then it got this sort of, I don't know, that Italian bella canto or whatever it is singing, the singing becomes really rapid with like when anyone makes fun of opera music, they go, oh, that's like that really thick bella canto. I don't know what the word is. The Italian sort of opera that it developed into. And Richard Wagner has a lot of that, and I don't like it. I can't get used to it. It's just too rapid. It's like a bit like gospel music. It's just the melody has kind of been polluted by all this too much ornate stuff going on with the vocals, and it doesn't like pay respect to the melody, because melody is one of my favorite things, or harmony and melody are my favorite things in music, and a good harmony, a good melody should be powerful enough to send the message without making a mess, like elaborating on it like that. So I don't like the opera in Wagner, which is a lot. There's a lot of opera, and it's all like that. So it's kind of ruins it for me. I mean, purists would probably think I'm crazy, but that's what I hear. That's what my ears have always heard. So yeah, Wagner. So I've spent a long time on Wagner. Sorry about that. Handel. So what do I like about Handel? I love Handel. I listen to Handel more in modern times. I didn't listen to it so much earlier on in my life because of that Hallelujah. Hallelujah, Hallelujah, Hallelujah. That ruined it for me. I kind of associated that with Handel and just sort of waved him away. But no. Yeah, one thing I should also mention as well, which is going to be relevant probably here and with a few of the other composers, is my huge love for medieval music. I listen to medieval music a lot. I love medieval music. I believe because when I was a child, my father used to play a lot of medieval-inspired music. One of my favourite bands and one of my father's favourite band was Jethro Tull. Jethro Tull does have a lot of medieval music in it. Some of the albums, like Song from the Wood, that album is just, it's a medieval album almost, with a little bit of rock thrown in. So he's very medieval. When I grew up, I heard a lot of medieval stuff. Also Richie Blackmore from Deep Purple. I mean, he's got a lot of medieval influence in his music. He's even done Renaissance music or Baroque or something. I don't know. He's even joined a band, Blackmore's Night, which did sort of that era music. I can't remember what era he did, but yeah, early sort of medieval music. Baroque? Yeah, Baroque. And also, on top of that, my parents worked at a theme park called Australia's Wonderland, which is now closed. Australia's Wonderland had a massive section called Medieval Fair, which was just like a medieval world. It was like, had medieval buildings, and the rides were named after like Dragon's Flight and the Wizard's Fury and all these things named after medieval themes. There was paintings and banners, all those Haldoric banners, those big medieval colours and banners and paintings and images of like knights in shining armour and dragons and all that kind of stuff. And in the background, there was always medieval music playing. And because my parents worked there, I got free admission. So I spent a lot of my childhood and my teens going to Australia's Wonderland on the weekends and absorbing all that medieval stuff with the medieval music. So it's become part of my DNA where I really love medieval music. Handel is definitely not medieval, but I can kind of hear a tie between medieval music, especially with his use of brass and horns and stuff like that, and also I suppose to a lesser extent, the organ, which I don't know, the organ isn't prolific in medieval music, but brass definitely is. And I also think that Handel's sense of melody and everything is also tied in with medieval music. So there's a big correlation, I think, between medieval music and Handel, and that's what I like about Handel. If you ever want to feel like you're royalty, if you ever want to feel like you're a member of the royal family or like you're a king or a queen, put on Handel. Just go now and put on Handel, and it'll make you feel like part of the royal family. So I do like Handel. But anyway, we'll move on because we've got a lot to get through. J.S. Bach. I mean, I don't think I should even mention Bach, to be fair. Everyone loves Bach. Even, like, you take a rock bass player, and you say, do you like classical music? And they go, no, I hate classical music. Oh, but I like Bach. Everyone is into Bach. And Bach it was the first composer that I really enjoyed and got familiar with. Again, my dad used to play a lot of prog rock, and there was a band called Sky which did a cover of Toccata, and I didn't know it was a cover. It was just a really, really excellent instrumental rock song that I absolutely loved when I was a kid. And I later on found out it was Bach. It was Toccata in Fugue in D minor, and I spent a lot of time trying to learn that when I was a kid. That and so many other examples I could think of why I've got Bach there. One thing I'd say about Bach is I don't listen to him much anymore, but the influence he had on me musically, he has to be included. Okay, so the next one we've got is Debussy, and we've got Eric Satie as well. I'm going to throw those two together because to me they're kind of from the same sort of family. They're both French. I'm pretty sure they're both French. They're from the same era. They do this impressionist style music. So a lot of the musicians that I've got here, a lot of their music is showcasing musicality, like they're showing their chops. They're showing how well they can play, how well they know music. So, for example, Bach, Beethoven, definitely Paganini, Tchaikovsky. Rachmaninoff. Perhaps Tchaikovsky, Rachmaninoff. They're all about, part of their music is showcasing their abilities. Where Debussy and Eric Satie, I feel, don't do that at all. All they do is create music with emotion, and that paints a sort of picture that's kind of like creates an atmosphere, and they're so exceptional at it. I remember reading a comment a couple of weeks ago that Debussy took 15 years to compose Clair de Lune, and I would believe that when you listen to it, it's got such harmonic depth and so much variation to the theme that he creates in Clair de Lune that you would believe. Yeah, I could believe that it would have taken him 15 years. Eric Satie as well. He famously wanted to have background music that you put on in the background, and actually, out of all the composers, as far as piano goes, Eric Satie is the one that I've spent most of my time learning. And I know that if I sat down on a piano now and started playing, my wife could vouch for the fact that Eric Satie's music is what I've spent most of my time playing myself. Eric Satie famously put on a performance of his music, and he got the shits because people were paying attention to his music. He wanted it to be background music for the event, but people were enjoying the music so much, not paying attention. And because the idea of his music was to be in the background, Eric Satie was getting annoyed that people were paying attention to his music. So that's one little funny thing I thought I should mention about Eric Satie. Next one's Maurice Ravel. In all honesty, there's only one really piece of music by Ravel that I do listen to a lot, and that's is a bolero. I think it's called Bolero. And it's kind of I would call it modern, because it's got, I don't know if it's ostinato is the right word, but in modern music, in rock music, you'd call it a riff. It's got riffs. It's got a drum beat a repetitive drum beat that repeats itself. Bolero, out of all, the thing about classical music is there's so much variation in each piece, but bolero is repetitive, very repetitive. It's two parts that go over and over again. But they increase in intensity as the song progresses. So, that's... And I do listen to that a lot, bolero. And I love listening to interpretations of bolero. Like, there's piano players that just do bolero solo on the piano, and they're able to do so much with bolero. It's really fascinating and amazing to listen to. But that's pretty much all for Ravel. Sorry, I've got a bit of a cough. Maybe I've got COVID. Next one, I'm going to drink. Next one is Beethoven. I mean, again, like Bach, do I need to explain Beethoven? Like, everyone knows who Beethoven is, right? One thing I suppose, out of billions of things I could say about Beethoven, one thing I will say, like on a personal level, is, again, my dad listening to Jethro Tull when I was a child, very young, maybe, 10, and he listened to Jethro Tull this live album, and it had a keyboard solo, and the keyboard player, during the solo, would do this really cool chord section that I always loved, really fast, rapid. I loved it. And it was not for 20 years later I overheard a different version of it. I'm like, hey, that's the solo from the Jethro Tull keyboard solo. And it took me a while, a few years. I was trying to dig around, like, what is this? And I realised after some time that it was Beethoven's sonata, one of his sonatas. Because I was listening to one of his sonatas, and suddenly I heard that, and I was like, what? Holy shit, that's where that comes from. Oh my God. I was in disbelief. And I thought, okay, all that time, that keyboard solo was Beethoven. But anyway, let's move on, because Beethoven's obvious. Rachmaninoff. So Rachmaninoff, I went through a period where I was obsessed with Rachmaninoff, maybe about 4 years ago. I've always heard bits and pieces of his music. Excuse me. But it wasn't until I was focused on the piano that took me to Rachmaninoff, because Rachmaninoff is more of a piano player, and all these compositions are based on piano. And I have a kind of thing for composers who base their music on piano, because piano is a great instrument that can appeal to any style of music, whether it's classical or rock or blues or whatever, jazz, anything. Piano can do anything. And because you've got the ability to play with two hands, like unlike other instruments, you can do rhythm and melody at the same time. There's so much that you can do with piano. And so I really love piano-orientated music. Rachmaninoff is very showy, very flashy, very complex. Not to the extent like, how do you pronounce it, Liszt or Chopin, but it's still very showy, and it's got that very Russian. I don't know how to explain it, but Russian music has this very, I don't know if it's patriotic's the right word, but it's got this sort of style about it. Russian, like when you put Rachmaninoff on, you don't have to guess whether it's Russian or not. It's Russian. You can hear it's Russian. But yeah, Rachmaninoff. That's one of my favorites. Tchaikovsky. Again, that's another Russian guy. He doesn't have so much chops and complexity to his music. He does have complexity to his music. He has a lot of complexity to his music, but there's also a lot of the music breathes a lot as well. I mean, if you think of Swan Lake, is it Swan Lake? Yeah, that ballet. That's amazing. I still listen to that. Like, it's some of these pieces you hear over and over again when you're growing up, everywhere, in media, other people playing it. But it's such incredible music that it's not like rock music where once you hear it for a few years you get bored of it. Classical music has so much in it, and I think it's because it's from a time where there was no internet, they didn't do anything but devote their lives to their instrument, and the result was classical music. So that's Tchaikovsky. Did I mention why I like Tchaikovsky? I don't know. Maybe he could be right. That could just be one that I just put in there to make up the numbers, because I wouldn't call Tchaikovsky one of my favorites, to be fair. So let's cross that off the list and say that was, my ego putting Tchaikovsky down. Stravinsky. I don't have a lot to say about Stravinsky, except because I don't know a lot about his different pieces, really. But I do know that one thing that I have in common with Stravinsky, my ears, and when I used to play music, is Stravinsky's tendency, big tendency to push the boundaries and to go outside the normal sort of musical rules that Western music has set. And you can hear that a lot. Like if you go put on Stravinsky right now, chances are you'll be met with a very strange music that goes everywhere. That's what I like about Stravinsky, is he's pushing the boundaries all the time, constantly. And it takes you on a journey, and you're wondering what's coming up next, and I love that about Stravinsky. But besides that, I don't have a lot to say about Stravinsky, but I do listen to Stravinsky a lot, but I'm not that familiar with what his pieces are. I purely just listen to it for the sake of listening to it. Grieg. Grieg. So I think why I put Grieg is like, I mean, everyone knows that. What's that? Oh, one thing I'll say about Grieg. I'll try and remember the name, but I was trying to find Rite of Spring. I had Rite of Spring in my head. And I was trying to listen. I wanted to listen to it. So I'm looking for Rite of Spring. And I put in Rite of Spring. So it comes up, Rite of Spring, Stravinsky. I thought, I didn't know that was Stravinsky. And I put the music on. I'm like, where is it? And I'm going through it, trying to find the section in my head that I really want to listen to. And I spent actually like years looking for Rite of Spring, this section that I really wanted to listen to. And I realized it was Grieg. And it wasn't until, what's it called? Morning, it's got a reference to the morning. I can't think of it off the top of my head. But anyone who knows Grieg knows exactly what I'm talking about, that morning time thing. That thing. And that time I thought it was Stravinsky, and it was Grieg. And like only like dawned on me like after years of searching for it. So Grieg, yeah. Next one. Okay, this one is significant. So Gregorio Algeri. The reason I've got him is there's one piece of music that he has done. Misery Mei Dios. Misery Mei or Misery. Whatever you want to call it. First heard it, of all places, on a documentary about Adolf Hitler. And they were talking about how when Adolf Hitler was a child, he'd go into churches and he'd listen to all this music and become intoxicated by this music. And while they're explaining this, in the background they were playing this piece of music. It was a choral singing, but it was just the most incredible melody I've ever heard in my life. And I had to watch the documentary, that part of it, over and over again and just try and absorb it, because it was so incredible. And I was looking in the credits, trying to find what is that piece of music. Couldn't find it for ages. And then a YouTuber, there's just this guy just talking about something, and then he edits this piece of music in the background. And it was the same piece of music, and I messaged him. I said, what's that piece of music? I've been looking for that. And he goes, oh, that's Misery Mei by, what's his name again? Gregorio Allegri. I always call him Algeri, but it's Allegri. And so I was like, thank you. And I found it and I looked for it and I discovered it. And it's the most amazing. I'm happy to say it's the most amazing piece of music ever made. I would happily say that with no problems and say that it is the most exceptional, incredible piece of music ever created. The Pope banned it from being played outside of the church because he thought it was too holy. And here's another thing. I was speaking to my older brother, and I hadn't spoken to him for a while. And we used to talk about rock music. We used to always talk about music, but we never talked about classical because he wasn't really big on classical to the extent that I was. But I just discovered this piece of music and I was trying to explain it to him. And the name, I couldn't remember the name, but I was saying, I've got to show you this piece of music. I'm going to find it. It's just the most amazing choral piece, and the melody is just like from another world. And he goes, and he starts talking about a piece of music that he's discovered, and he's going blah 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 blah. And then I heard the word Misery Mei, and I said, what did you just say? And he goes, it's Misery Mei. That's a piece of music. And I'm like, holy shit, we are literally talking about the same piece of music. I couldn't believe it. And, as time went on, unfortunately, a few months later, he passed away. But we played that piece of music at his funeral. And, so that's a very special piece of music, very important to me. That's why he's on the list. Okay, so the next one's Peryton. Am I a classical intellectual genius or a buffoon? Yes, I'm a buffoon because Peryton is not classical. Peryton was hundreds of years before classical music. Peryton was before medieval music. So you've got like a Gregorian sort of chant. Then you've got sort of medieval, then Baroque, then classical, then Romantic, then 20th century. Peryton is slightly on the tail end of like the chanting stuff, where they were like Gregorian people singing Latin phrases from the Bible. Like Peryton's just slightly after that. So the fact that I put him as one of my favorite classical composers is stupid. It doesn't make sense. He's not classical. But I think why I like him is because he developed harmony. I love harmony, as I said before. Harmony and melody are my two really favorite things in music. And he sort of really built the foundations for harmony. I believe he's credited for creating polyphony. And he also often has a rhythm to his music too, which you don't find in Gregorian sort of style music, like the chanting music. It's he always uses the same sort of rhythm. It goes... He always has that rhythm to it, which is interesting as well, unique. But besides that, there's not much about Periton I can say, except for the fact that he's way before classical, so I don't know why I've put him. Next is Monteverdi. Again, you could probably argue that that's a bit early to be considered classical. Monteverdi's sort of famous for creating the first real opera. So the first opera that is good. Like he's sort of, when people sort of, if you're learning about what's the first opera, there's this Greek one. No, there is a lot like that could be considered operas, but there's this famous Greek one. I think it's called Daphne or something. That's not known in musical circles as a proper opera. It's Monteverdi who's credited as creating the first proper musical opera. And it is that opera that makes me love Monteverdi. That is the reason I love Monteverdi. I love watching renditions. I've seen renditions that are very, they pay respects to the era. They have all the instruments, like in the string section, they have a couple of violins, but they've also got these old boxy style violins. Before the violin came out, they used those. And they use, instead of trumpets and whatever, they use hunting horns. And these big lute things that are like really giant lutes that they didn't use in the classical period, but they used before the classical period. And the composer, instead of wearing a suit, the composer's got this puffy sort of medieval gown thing. And here's the other thing. It's not medieval music, but you can definitely hear the tie between Monteverdi and medieval. It's kind of, you can hear the bridge between medieval music and classical music when you listen to Monteverdi. And it starts out with this brass section, and then it goes in. The reason I'm laughing is because I played it to my wife one time, and I said, every time I come back from work, I want to be introduced into the house with this music playing, and it's very like triumphant sort of brass music. But and the other thing I love about Monteverdi's opera is it's so old that the vocal melodies are very refined and very restrained, which I enjoy way more. So I actually really like, it's probably one of the only operas, besides modern musicals, like Les Miserables and all that stuff, it's probably the only opera that I really like. So yeah, Monteverdi. I could say a lot more about Monteverdi, but this video is going to be an hour long. Mozart. I mean, what can we say about Mozart? Like, I got into Mozart in my early teens after Amadeus, the movie. I knew a lot of Mozart music. My parents played a lot of Beethoven and Mozart growing up. And it wasn't until the movie that I really kind of connected with Mozart and understood how exceptional Mozart is. That other piece of music that I was talking about before, that we played at my brother's funeral, Mozart, I said the Pope didn't allow anyone to play it outside the church. Mozart heard it and went home and transposed it after listening to it. That's what he's famous, one of the things he's famous for is hearing Miserere Mei and going home and transposing it. And yeah, there's a lot of I have a lot of love for Mozart's music. It's too much to probably mention, but again, it's one of those names where, did I Google Mozart and go, oh, here's a name, I'll put that down. Like, everyone knows Mozart. Who doesn't know Mozart? Next is Vivaldi. I'm a bit narrow with Vivaldi. It's the Four Seasons, the obvious one that I really love. But it's so full. The Four Seasons is so full of exceptional music. I think it's violin. It comes from the violin. I'm not sure. I'm not a music historian, but I assume Vivaldi may be a violin player potentially. I'm not sure, or has a strong association with violin players, because the Four Seasons is very violin orientated, which is great for guitar players. When I was a guitar player, I did spend a lot of time learning Vivaldi material, because anything that's good for violin transposes over to the guitar very well as well. So that's where I got a lot of my musicality on the guitar, was from Vivaldi. But it's only the Four Seasons really that I listen to. I'm actually not even familiar with his other stuff. I may have heard it, but I haven't paid enough attention to know what it is. But what I can say, there's probably even obvious ones. There's probably people going, don't you know this one by Vivaldi? But the Four Seasons is something that I listened to. The last time I listened to it was a couple of weeks ago, if that. Not very long ago at all. I do love Vivaldi, and I do love the Four Seasons. Okay, the next one's Paganini. Now, Paganini was very important in my life, because when I was 12, 13 years old, I had an acoustic guitar, but I bought an electric guitar when I was about 13, 12 or 13. And one of my biggest, most favourite guitar players of all time was Yngwie Malmsteen, a Swedish guitar player who's credited for creating a style of music called neoclassical, which is like metal/rock with heaps of classical in it. A bit like what Deep Purple were doing, but way more classical. And Yngwie, the guitarist Yngwie, I was obsessed with Yngwie. I even had his signature model guitar. Like, I had the same guitar as him. I'd listen to him every day. I'd sit down and play his songs all the time, non-stop, for year after year after year. So Yngwie was a big inspiration to me musically when I was younger. And Yngwie's favourite musician, besides Ritchie Blackmore from Deep Purple, was Paganini. When Yngwie heard Paganini for the first time, that gave him the idea of what to do on the guitar. And the thing about Paganini, if you don't know Paganini, he's a violin player. And his whole thing was to try and be the best violin player in the world. And he was all about showing musicality and just basically shredding. He was doing shredding before shredding came out. So his music's also very good for guitar, because it's very difficult to play the stuff that he plays on guitar. But it also, the patterns, they cross over very well for guitar. So Paganini, I've spent a lot of time listening to his music and learning his music, and a lot of the music, the way I play on the guitar, I can attribute to Paganini. The last one, we're at the end, we made it to the end, is King Henry VIII. So, again, medieval music. Oh, again, okay, idiot. King Henry VIII that's not classical, that's medieval. So, yes, he composed a song called Pastime with Good Company, which I think I started paying attention to that song when I went to a medieval fair, and I saw a medieval band playing Pastime with Good Company, and it was familiar to me. And they said it's called Pastime with Good Company, and I went home and dug deep into this piece of music and realised that I'd heard Jethro Tull do a cover of this song. I also heard Ritchie Blackmore from Deep Purple do a cover of this song. I think he did it with Rainbow, if I'm not mistaken. But that one piece of music is so significant, and I love it so much. It's such a great... It's like Greensleeves, but with a fast beat. It's kind of got that... It's got that sort of melodic minor thing. It's got like that... Yeah, the melodic minor mode. It's kind of got that mode to it. The same as Greensleeves has. But yeah, it's also, when I listen to medieval music, which I do a lot, like the other day I was listening to a bunch of medieval music a couple of weeks ago, and Pastime with Good Company came on, and my wife said, oh, I love this one. So even with all my strange musical taste and medieval music, Pastime with Good Company is such a good piece of music that even my wife likes it. But that's it. We made it to the end. So, did I Google these names, or do I kind of know who some of them are? I'll let you be the judge, but all we need to know is that I'm petty enough to make a big long video about it.